Hello and welcome to another one of our videos. This is a good education video. I've had a lot of stuff about Piriformis Syndrome before and I get a lot of questions all the time, so I'm going to hope to answer a lot of the ones that you may have. Alright, so I'll get right into the crux of it. Basically with Piriformis Syndrome, as also with most injuries, but especially this one, there's really a big vicious cycle that tends to happen that reinforces the pain, and it just gets worse. Even if you do nothing, it keeps getting worse. So I'm going to explain to you the vicious cycle and then very quickly how you get out of it. But there's a lot of stuff you'll be able to already find about this, what you can do about it. But understanding the cycle of it is very important. So first thing is, most of the time it's caused from poor habits. So it's a postural thing: sitting too often, crossing your legs, walking with poor shoes, poor running technique. Could be a lot of things. So it's basically repetitions of poor habits that are setting you up for it, to the one day you get the pain. Occasionally it's from a traumatic accident, like where you might have been hit, like in a collision in sporting, like a knee into the butt or something. But that's very rare. Most of the cases are postural problems. Once you've sort of developed the problem from what caused it all, instability is then going to be would have been building up in the background, and then it basically your body adapts to the instability and stiffens your hips up. So you create stiffness to overcome the instability. That then restricts your movement, but even worse than that, it starts to inhibit the glutes. So the glutes sort of get switched off, and then compensation through other muscles will start to kick in. So once the glutes have weakened from the hip flexors stealing their movement and compensation from the poor habits, you've got severe glute atrophy and weakness, which then forces the piriformis muscle to start overworking, because basically the piriformis is a very tiny version of the glutes, I suppose. It's an assisting role in stabilizing the hip and providing external rotation, but it's just not powerful enough to do it on its own. But when the glutes aren't there, it says, well, we're the last guy standing, I'm going to kick in and work. And basically the hips and the piriformis are programmed to be the same, in that they will continue working and working and working while instability is present. So and you can sort of see already how the vicious cycle is going to start to be continuing on from here. So once the piriformis starts to get stronger, like any muscle, increases in size, and because of that, and where its location sitting so close to the sciatic nerve, it starts to touch the nerve. Now you're in all sorts of trouble. You're going to have pain radiating down your leg, and it will get worse when you're sleeping at night. You know, all these things. And now, so even resting will make it worse, because the resting makes the glutes weaker, and that makes the piriformis work more. So this is where resting is not a great idea. Anti-inflammatories are not really a good idea either, because they're just trying to turn off the fire alarm but not put the fire out. Compensatory movement will happen now, because you're going to be trying to avoid pain, and it will adapt to that by changing how you move. When you start changing how you move, then you start to set up new injuries like knee problems, back problems. Even a good leg will now start to be overloaded, and that could all end up in pain. So and then the very last thing is, which is what sort of keeps it permanent, is these new movement patterns that you've been using to avoid pain are now going to, with repetition, become permanent patterns that sort of reinforce everything that you've just done. So then you go back to where you started, and we start to create the circle create a habit with a new pattern, creates more instability in other joints. You'll continue to get this, and these two guys will be a big problem here, right? So but you'll have to sort of address things in order, all right? So that once you understand this pattern, and you can see why so many people just don't get anywhere, and if you try to skip steps and go to strengthening and standing up stuff, but you haven't addressed any of these things first, you're just going to end up back in pain again, because you haven't really addressing the real cause of things, and doing it in the order of how it sort of formed is how you're going to have to unform it, more or less. So how to break free. Okay, so there's many steps, but if I sort of condense it into 4 for you, basically it's eliminate the habits and restore your hip mobility first, because if you can get the stiffness away, And the hip, probably part 1 and 2 are almost together. I could almost have sort of made this 3 steps in a way, but for simplified, if we just sort of eliminate the habits, you're going to have to identify what they are. And like I've run through, and I'll go through this in a bit more detail for you, but basically, you eliminate the habits, hip mobility, improve the stability and the isolated glute function. Again, this is a tricky stage, very tricky stage. Once you sort of can get through that, then you're almost there, because now you just got to reinforce the good movement patterns, get rid of these faulty things that have been running, and then lastly you set yourself up for the strengthening stage where you can stick it all together, and then you'll never look back. So if I look at each stage on its own, firstly the first one, so repetitive movements like sitting too long, your workstation setup, sleep position, footwear, your occupation. They're the things you've got to identify. Even standing on one leg too often, all those things are going to be causing the problem. You've got to get rid of that, or else all the drills won't work. Then you're going to have to try and use little trigger point tools. So there's one here that we use. Foam rollers are great. Mobility drills and stretches, although sometimes the stretching aggravates it, so I wouldn't say it's always a good thing to do. But you do want to try and get the mobility back by getting rid of the stiffness that's present, and it will be a bit of pain through this stage, like a good pain to get rid of the bad pain. This goal at this stage is to reduce the inflammation, get the mobility back. Things like nerve flossing stuff, which there's plenty of videos we do, and it's in our advanced program. Great for like helping you release the sciatic nerve. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step, this is the tricky stage, really trying to get the stability and the glute function without winding up the piriformis. That's the hard part, because the glutes are shut down. Even though you have the right exercise to correct it, say the clam here or hip extensions, the piriformis could try to take over and do it, or the hip flexors as well, which then just sets you back to where you were. So even though it's the right exercises, your body has adapted and is doing everything weird. So you have to use the mobility drills between sets, to try and sort of shut them down. And then, like you can see here, I'm trying to get this girl to activate her glutes and not try and wind up through the hamstrings and use her lower back instead. It's quite tricky, and by using this we add stability to the leg on the stance phase. But usually like a very simple drills, mainly lying down here. Try to evolve into standing, but that'll be sort of into the next stage. But this is the real tricky stage. If you can work out how to strengthen your glutes without the piriformis kicking in, you're ready for step 3, which is then start programming the movement patterns. And this is really where you start to train the brain, because we start to stand up, and it's all of these movements here that can greatly aggravate it, but they're also the same ones that get rid of the problem. So things like focusing on the squat, the bending patterns, the single leg is going to be massive, so huge stability and glute strength needed here. But again, if you don't have it, you're just going to aggravate things. So if you get it wrong, you'll go backwards. Even the lunge, it's a bit more stable, but if you haven't released the hips, got some stability in this leg without kicking in with, because if there's instability present, you're going to recruit the hip flexors and the piriformis. If there's stability present but it may not be strong enough, you just want to encode a good pattern of movement to then get to the next stage, which is the strengthened stage. And this is the final piece of the puzzle, and you'll need a lot of time, as you would with the other steps as well, but you'll really need a lot of time to make sure that you get this right, and with the emphasis being on quality of movement, not necessarily volume of training. You might need quite a few days rest between workouts, so you don't enter the workout sore and compensate and cheat on it and go backwards again. So that's why it's a very tricky injury to get rid of. But things like the deadlift and the bent over rows, single leg stuff, loaded up this time and with a ball unstable, pushing in the single legs, in the split stance, Turkish gaps, all different things where you're sort of encouraging stability and mobility in all different movement patterns. And these are the key. Once you sort of can get these right, you never look back, as long as you look after it and don't go back to faulty movement again. But and if you need more information, there's an advanced program that we have here, where we go through about 60, 70 different exercises all through these steps in great order, give you programs and you can't really muck it up. You can go to our online shop at this link here on our website, and that'll give you you can get either the book or the video, or if you get the video, we'll give you the book for free. All right, but the main thing to understand out of all this is this vicious cycle. If you can get your head around how this vicious cycle is sort of working, and you can work out, okay, where are you stuck on it, that's where you need to work. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed that video, and I'll see you on our next one.